Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Inbal Weinberg. I am the co-founder of the Production Designers Collective. I'm going to speak a little bit about the organization as people slowly file in. Um, I have my co-founder here with me, Kalina Ivanov, and the two of us started the collective more than 10 years ago in order to connect with our fellow designers and advocate for production design. We do a lot of events year round, and we're thrilled today to do a webinar about the Gilded Age. A little bit more about the collective. We do year-round events such as this. We do in-person events, panels, and workshops. And we also have two flagship events. One is called International Production Design Week, which we just had in October, which is a kind of global festival of production design event that happens in more than 40 cities around the world. And the other is called the Production Designers Gathering, which is our biannual conference, which happens on an island in Greece, where we come together for a kind of retreat-like meeting of the minds. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kalina to host the session. And I'm just going to mention that for Q&As, if anyone is interested in asking questions of our panelists, you're welcome to write the questions below in the Q&A tab on Zoom. So over to you, Kalina.
Thank you, Inbal. Welcome everyone. Today, we're very lucky and fortunate to have Bob Shaw, who is a premier New York designer. And I've known Bob since my storyboarding days on Quiz Show. That's how we met. But Bob is the king of HBO. You can say that. He started with Sopranos, then did Boardwalk Empire, and now he's doing Gilded Age, which he will talk very soon about. But in the meantime, he also journeyed to do two movies with Martin Scorsese, Wolves of Wall Street and The Irishman. And that is Bob. Lauri Pitkus is one of the premier location managers in New York. I've known Lauri since our days on Lulu on the Bridge, you know, and she has done very good work in film, like The Goldfinch. But she also works with Bob a lot on his shows, and particularly on The Gilded Age, which she will speak about today. And our third panelist is Douglas Purver. And is that how you pronounce your name?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, great. I got it right. And Douglas is a really one of the most sought after VFX supervisors, and he did 0 days lately. You've seen in television, Mrs. Maisel, but his work today that he will talk about is on the Gilded Age. And without further ado, we will start the panel.
Hello. I was asked by Inbal and Kalina whether would want to do some sort of presentation, and I said, well, I would really love to do something with locations and VFX because particularly on a period show, it they're so interdependent, and a problem comes up, and you don't find the locations as written in the script when it says train station, when it says ferry landing, all these different things, they don't exist. So we always have to sort of figure out how we're going to approach it and whether we're going to find a location and then we're going to have to build around it, or whether we're going to build from scratch. And it all involves like very close work between our departments. So even if you wanted to start with the visuals, um, this is just who we are. The central issue in the show is the old money in New York versus the new money in New York, and our characters of the Van Ryn sisters, the Brooke and Van Ryn family, live across the street from the Russell family, who are the nouveau riche, and they live in their traditional brownstone, and they watch in horror out their window as this marble mansion uh, starts to overwhelm them. And so we always knew we had to have a relationship between the two buildings. We always knew we had to have horses and carriages and mud and dirt. So it was a given that we were going to have to build a backlot set. And so these first two images are the illustrations that were done. I think these were done by Hugh Saccott. Just wanted to give people credit for where it's due. And so that was where we started. And one of the things that's a little frustrating, I'm sure, for locations is, well, this was a set, you built it, and there's not really any location work. And actually finding a place to put the back lot was quite a task. And Lauri had the Museum of Armor, which is where we landed, in her memory banks from a previous show. And she knew that they had extra space on their site, and not just finding space to do the show, finding space to hold the horses, finding space to hold the background, finding space for all of our infrastructure. So one of the earliest things we decided was that the early scripts had the street was like 56th or 55th Street or something like that, and we asked, was it at all possible to move them uptown far enough so in one direction we would have Central Park? Because again, the location that Lauri found did have, woods at one end of what was going to be our street, and that means that we can look in another direction without having to do visual effects everywhere. You can see sometimes Douglas has to change the colors of the trees, but at least they're trees, and it was a big godsend not to have to do visual effects in two different directions. So you can see where we decided to do the cut line, and one of the biggest questions you come across initially is how much to build practically and how much to rely on visual effects. And so we decided to do full 2 stories of the Brook House and mostly 2 stories of the Russell House, and the rest sort of falls into place. You can proceed, I think. So this is the view where we have part of our practical set, and then as we get deeper into the background, it's all created by visual effects. So there you go. I've done a few presentations in the past, and this is usually where there's a gasp because people are always surprised that as much of it is visual effects as is the case. So I think that's certainly a great compliment to Douglas and the visual effects team that people don't seem to be aware of how much how much was done digitally. One of the earliest, so we did start, even though we're in the digital age, with a model, and even though you can do 3D things and walk people around them, the directors really felt they wanted to see something physically in the form of a model so that they could look at the whole thing in one shot. And we the darker parts of the model is where we're building practically, and then all the things that are very faint are the visual effects. So one of the decisions that I think you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong here, Douglas, is that we kind of find ourselves wishing we had done a complete second floor of the Russell Mansion, because this angle or something close to it is pretty constant in the show. And that's the thing when you're starting a project. If it's a feature, it's one thing. The whole story. What everything's going to be. But in an ongoing series, you don't know how much we're going to see a certain angle, how much we're going to see a certain set, and it's hard to break down the number of visual effects shots, in this case, stretched out over 3 years versus what it would have cost to build the second story. And going into was it the second or third season, we talked about completing the second story, and it's one of those hard to explain things why it became more expensive to go in and build the second story now than it would have to have built it when we were at the onset. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm very surprised you didn't build a second story. In my experience, a second story is always a good thing to have. But I understand why HBO was so reticent at the beginning, and now they're really kicking themselves. You know.
Well, the thing is, it's one of those things where they definitely went all in on the show and invested a lot of money in the first season, um, having no idea whether there would be a second season. And but even when you have a lot of money, there's always a breaking point. And the front of the Russell House though is still a mystery. And I think the next slide is possibly even more of a mystery. Yes.
Yeah, oh that really, I mean, I wanted to ask you, why did you choose to do that way? Because it doesn't take much to fill in what's green to fill it in with a brick wall.
It was literally a bottom line thing of like we got to a certain point. One of
Yeah,
the one of the things that people don't realize is that there's an awful lot of infrastructure, all of which was brokered by Lori in the locations department in being able to build on this site. It's funny when years back when we built the boardwalk for Boardwalk, we just sort of found the lot and plunked it down there, and no one really gave us many restrictions. But here there was all sorts of, what the fire prevention issues are. There's a cistern in here somewhere.
There's many.
And Laura, you can speak a little bit about what we had to.
Yeah, there was, I mean, because it became politically interesting and a little bit complicated because it turned out that the land is owned by the county and the legal structure for the county is overseen by the state. It was actually the space that we were looking at is actually considered part of a park, part of a larger park over at Old Bethpage Village Restoration. And when we talked to them about keeping this for a length of time, I have to say in their back pocket, I think they were thinking of 4 or 5 seasons because we wanted to make sure that we had the rights to hang on to this land for at least 5 years. As a result, we needed to work with some local legislators and we needed to, do what location managers do and wield a little bit of influence and get people higher up at HBO to talk to people in government and draft some kind of agreement whereby we knew that we would have the land or the rights to be on the land for over 5 years if we were going to build this kind of infrastructure. And what they said in return is, what are we going to do with the backlot if you guys are going to be here? And we started talking about things like, well, what if it could become a soccer field when we're gone? So that's exactly what could happen. If the backlot is torn down at a later date, there's a whole stormwater management system that was put in place. There's a whole indigenous plant thing that goes on. I mean, it was very detailed in terms of what the county mandates were for us to be here. And I think there are 23 cisterns underneath the backlot to date. Or
Which is
23
obviously very
stormwater. There were
expensive and
at
don't
23 wells, I should say, not cisterns.
it's obviously very expensive, and so it
And that
starts
was the cost. Yeah.
jacking up the cost of the backlot set. And so at a certain point it was you everyone's been in the position of like you have to take 10% off or you have to take X amount off. And
yeah.
at a certain point those decisions were made, but this particularly is seen all the time. And it's again, we took a pass at what it would cost to add it in a later season, but something that was never factored in. We've done 3 seasons, but because of the writer's strike and because of the COVID period, it's taken like 5.5, 6 years to do that.
Mm.
So in theory, we haven't been outside as long as we have. We've been here all this time, and then it goes through an entire winter. It sort of again reminds you of why they moved the industry west at one point in history. And there are some photos of uh, going into season 2, and we thought we would have money to build the things that we wanted to build. Instead, I think we had close to like $500,000 worth of restoration to do. I mean, there were literally mushrooms growing out of the steps to the Russell House, and big chunks of uh, the siding that fell off the Russell Mansion. So any money that we would have had to complete the things we wanted to complete was spent on repair. Maybe we can run this and see.
Yes.
We see.
And that is when they move in, right? That's from episode one.
No, this is actually when they had was this the at home or was it the season finale ball? I don't
This,
remember.
this was the season finale ball. This is the last shot of the
Uh,
Right.
of the first
That-
season,
That's
actually.
why there's garland on the front of the house.
oh yeah, that's
I
right.
think at one
That's
point we talked about extending the garland, and then we have an ongoing issue of like leaving somewhere to go in terms of upping the ante on the parties that they constantly have.
but
So,
beautiful visual effects work. Douglas, can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think, a lot of these buildings were already, kind of picked out as far as what the design was. And Bob's team had a great library of research for these buildings that still exist in New York City somewhere or something very similar. And so I was able to go and photograph textures and elements for each of these buildings to build our digital asset when we were extending all of these sets. So, again, working very closely with Bob and his team and Lori and her team to get me to these places to take these photographs or footage and elements to help build the set. And then, once we have this fully digital version of the backlot, we can then place it into any of these shots that the director or DP conceive. This is a big drone shot that kind of finishes off the season. And, we can look at it from any angle we want because we have this like fully CG, 360-degree model
It's
asset.
it's an interesting version of like a question of what's real because there's real in the sense that we've built it all practically, and then there's real in the sense of it's an actual building in Park Slope or wherever that we suggested would be a good
Model. Yeah.
building to have on the street, and then Douglas would go out and photograph it, and it's substantially more successful or texturally especially than a digitally created from scratch building.
Yeah, it's always, I mean, from my world, I always love to start from something real, and any chance we get to do that, we jump all over it. So, the research that the art department does is, I'm able to tap into that library all the time whenever possible.
And then Laurie gets clearance so that he doesn't get arrested while he's photographing the house.
Sometimes we just send them and we're like,
Yeah,
good luck.
see what happens.
The parking clears at 9. Go
Yeah.
then.
But yeah, it was interesting, that green wall with all the doors. Just to go back to that for a second, I think like Bob's saying, we have to trim costs where we can, but we decide what are the most important parts to keep. And to keep life going on the street, we love to have people coming and going from these doors and doorsteps, and having something practical for them to walk through it's just infinitely better than just having a green hole that they're disappearing into or something like that.
One thing I could say that people have commented on was when we were finishing up the back lot and they were wanting to tighten the reins and say we've spent enough money. I said we haven't toned the street, the sidewalk yet. And it was like, well, and we told them how much money we needed to do that, and they said, no, it's going to be fine. It doesn't really matter. And then after season one, I got comment after comment about how the street looked too clean. And it's like, yeah, that was why I asked to tone the sidewalk. And then we were allowed to do that going into the second season because everyone agreed that it looked too clean. But yeah, that was one where we couldn't convince anybody that it really needed to be done at the time. So meanwhile, inside the mansion, this is just a small point of the things we had to decide, and one of them was whether or not it was worth it to actually put the ceiling on the Great Hall, as we call it, of the Russell Mansion. And it was all done in 3D. I mean, you can see it's a pretty substantial ceiling and a pretty substantial investment, and with a lot of detail. And in this case, it was determined by doing some 3D imaging and walking around the set and having the DP have us show some angles that he thought he would do often, and the same thing with the directors. And it was determined that in this case, it made more sense to build the ceiling than it did to digitally add it all the time. Whereas in our dining room, I really don't know what's going along with the screen grab. It's kind of weird. But it was decided that we would rarely see this mural in the center. So that is in reality not there. And that's added by VFX. We don't really see it very often, do we?
Not too often. We might catch a corner of it as we're following people in and out of these spaces. But I think the Great Hall was story-wise, it was always, this big grand entrance and so new that people were always coming in and like looking around. And I think that added to the importance to have it there.
It's as much a lighting issue as it is of making a practical ceiling issue, since obviously having the center of the set be open is useful.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of our big, I would always say with our director, with our producer, David Crockett, how often do we space out what are meant to be our kind of wow moments? Because early on in the script, I said, we have three wows in one script, and then nothing happens for two episodes. And so we kind of try to space them out a little more. And one of the big moments of season one was the lighting of the New York Times building. And we had already decided we were going to be working in Troy, New York, because it just offers a lot of location possibilities because there's block after block of period housing that really hasn't been touched. You go to any block in New York that's equivalent, and there's, as a friend of mine calls it, a glass cube dropped from space in the middle of the block. And in this case, the building behind the monument there is what's the name of the building? The Cannon
The
Building?
Cannon Building.
Cannon Building, I think, goes back to 1838. And so we had that already. And people ask about the monument, and I said, oh, it was destroyed later. But I just that was something I looked at the first round of location folders and thought, well, this is where we do the times. So this is the illustration. And I think the reality actually is substantially better than the illustration.
It was a magical moment, really magical moment.
It was one of those magical moments for the crew too, because we'd been in Troy for several weeks. Um, they allowed us to take the main square of their town, and this again goes back to locations, and cover it with dirt for over a month. And
Yeah.
and as many background people had, as many horses, as many carriages. It was quite a heavy background day. Just beyond our set, there were police, there were, little barricades, and then there was half the town of Troy watching it. And it was this really the kind of feeling that we all are in this business for, where everything comes together and everybody's involved and everyone does their job, and it couldn't really have happened without so many moving parts. And not only did we enjoy it, the town enjoyed it. They thought they were getting a show for their for having their main square covered with dirt for over a month.
Oh, wonderful. It's
I was going
really,
to say also, sorry, I'm so sorry, Kalita, to cut you off. I was going to say one other thing that made it particularly magical that no one could have counted on is it kind of started to rain that evening. And so everything visually, I just remember going around taking still photographs and everything was just even more exponentially punchy as a result. And I think even that was something that fell into place for us in a way no one could have predicted.
One of the things here that actually works very well is the on the right side of the frame, the arched window. That was done practically, and we applied, vinyl signage to the building, and it just takes light so well. I mean, I know it can be done digitally, but it's one of those things where the real thing really makes a difference to my eye. I just love the way that looks and the highlights on the building. And here's the video.
yeah.
The really astute people will recognize it as being very similar to the Barnes and Noble building on 17th Street. And that was actually Douglas showed me that and said, "How would this work?" And I said, "Well, that would be great." So in that case, he found the building, we didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was walking around one day around Union Square. It just seemed to, I think we had to make it larger though. I think we widened it or something, but
There were some changes made, and we went back and forth with it quite a bit, but it all
yeah.
worked out. This was just to show that we had decided what we were going to do practically and what Douglas was going to do. And in the end, actually, we put maybe one awning per side on a building, and then Douglas sort of cloned the rest of them. So you can see there's that one sad awning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes, this building that, there's not much we could do about it. It's very 1920s. And, we put as much stuff on it as we could and put awnings on it. And, I don't think we had an angle where we really saw the top of it because as you know, sometimes you go and beg, please don't frame above here or don't do that. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't, but they were very very good about that in terms of where we were going to be too wide or give up our plan. And here's the dirt that they lived with for months. In season two, one of our big set pieces was the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. And again, we were talking about how we were going to do this, and Lauri, directed one of our scouts to take some photographs of from this point of where our location story house would be, where Roebling's house would be, and take this. So this location photo became kind of the model on how we were going to see the bridge. So, the building under the bridge tower there is taller, and they lopped the top of it off, and there was a lot of window rearrangement on that one. It's I say that the process that we work with, I call it grab and scribble, and sometimes it's a piece of video, and sometimes it's just a still frame, and Douglas will send it and say, well, what do you think of this? And then, usually I'm off somewhere. And I should thank God every day for the invention of the iPad because you can just take out your iPad and scribble on it and say, well, maybe this window should be higher, or maybe this should be smaller, or maybe this should be taller, or maybe you could move this over here. And we go back and forth, many, many times often, but it works really well, and it works well on the fly. And there was a lot of that with this. This is one where it wasn't in the script, and there was this one building that we had seen. What's funny is when we were doing the season one, they were like, "No, we can't go to Albany," because people weren't really familiar with the geography upstate, and they didn't realize it was probably less than 15 minutes away. And we had scouted Albany in season one, and I remember this one house that had a porch on it, and I kept saying, can we maybe get this house because then we could have people on the porch looking at the bridge, and that was one of those things where I'd check in with Lauri and say, have we heard anything? It's like, can't find them yet. They were hard, right?
Yeah, it was the one house. We probably had photographs of every single house on the adjacent 2 blocks, and we couldn't find the owner of that house. But we did, finally.
The 11th hour, of course, right?
Yes, it was a last minute.
Oh, that's the Brooklyn Bridge.
The Brooklyn Bridge, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting that, originally it was meant as a pedestrian bridge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah. What I love about the way the wider shots were handled is that it's not overly present. Not until you go in for the close-ups of the bridge itself, and is it a little clearer? Because sometimes these things can be too on the nose and or too placed or overly prominent. So I love that it's not super super clear in the wide shots. What I
It's
love, we only saw in an engraving on the upper right, there's like a balloon with fireworks coming out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And obviously, since we don't have any photographs of the event, but there were many engravings of the event, and there apparently were these, hot air balloons with fireworks spewing out of them. It definitely doesn't sound like it's great from a fire point of view. Um, but I love that VFX was able to bring them to life just from looking at the engraving.
Yeah, we were like scouring for just little details that would make it different from any other kind of firework display we've seen before, and those things immediately stood out in those
Well, what you've done
engravings.
so great is that that you have the hot spot closer to where the source was, and then it drops off toward the top. It's really 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 well done. And then we had two different vantage points from people uptown at the Russell Mansion watching the Brooklyn Bridge ceremony. It was huge. Apparently, everybody in the town was decorated. Like in the city, like in what would be Chelsea or Midtown, people were still like putting bunting on their houses. To celebrate this momentous event. I mean, we don't seem to get quite as excited about things these days. So there are two people of the servants at the Russell House who were watching the whole thing unfold, and we decided that we would build just enough to sort of cover them, and then they would add the rest of the house.
Yeah, and this involved, our main asset that we had already built for the backlot set, with some of the other buildings just being repurposed in the background. But we ended up rebuilding the whole rooftop to kind of hold up for this scene because we had never seen the rooftop before. So it was a much lower resolution asset. So even, Bob and his team, Larry and everybody, we had to do some new drawings to kind of give some life to these details along the rooftops.
The chimney was just there as a backstop. It doesn't necessarily track with where the where the fireplace inside the house would be. But sometimes you need to cheat a little. Now we went through a whole thing of photographing rooftops in Troy. Locations department went around and tried to find a vantage point, and ultimately it just seemed too cumbersome to figure out how we were going to deal with green screen being up on a rooftop somewhere, or whether the buildings were close enough. But Douglas, you said you actually used a lot of the location photos to build the vista that we see here.
Yeah, just to get reference on what those rooftops were like and get some good textures and reference at least, but it was all very useful to us in the end.
Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, I don't know why I don't have any photographs of the actual set. I couldn't find them anywhere. People are watching it from the rooftop of a brownstone in Brooklyn.
So you just jump from a rooftop to rooftop.
Yeah, and I have no idea. When you look at that little enclosed staircase in the back, I have no idea how they got up that staircase in these dresses. One at a time, I assume.
Yeah.
This is one of those scouting things. I say that there's so many locations that are going to appear on the script that just don't exist. So, it's the publishing company from 1882. And we had looked at some other locations in Troy, and the one thing I liked as a texture were the wooden walls. So we were going to be doing some filming at Lyndhurst in Tarrytown, and we're sort of wandering around the property, probably using the restroom here. When
Yes.
when I said, well, maybe we can do something with this and turn it into the publishing company. And Lori started negotiating. This is an illustration. Matt Sama did most of our illustrations in season one and again in season three. And he's obviously a pretty spectacular illustrator because people keep thinking that his renderings are photographs. But one of the negotiations was for Lori to get permission for us to paint the floor, which was gray, and then Peter Michael Jordaner and Peter
Gelfman.
Gelfman
Gelfman.
located this printing press somewhere in Massachusetts, and one of the things that had to happen was that the floor needed to be reinforced from the basement to hold the weight of this because it's a very, very heavy thing. And then we marked it on the floor and brought the director and said, "This is one of those things where if you change your mind, we cannot move it. Once we drop this, I forget how much it weighed a lot. It was
It weighed a lot, and also I think was in use somewhere else. And I think it traveled. There was talk of it traveling from Seattle at one point. It was crazy. There was like a whole tracking it, and it was moving around the country to different places. It was nuts. And then the big concern was whether we would be able to get it through the door or not
Mm.
after all of these
Yeah.
machinations.
it weighed
But we
like five or
did.
6,000 pounds.
Yeah, it was very heavy.
And you forget things like that. So this is some photographs taken during rehearsal. Obviously, we're back in pandemic period here. But you can see how heavy and how big this printing press was. But again, it was just the this was a carriage carriage house at Lyndhurst, and just I liked the texture. And then we built the vestibule just to get people in and out of the building without seeing too much. And then, of course, on the day, I think that they were hoping that we could have more background action outside the window, but it was a pretty narrow space. You know, horses don't back up very well. Again, here at one of our earliest scouting trips, we went to scout Lyndhurst, and this is a bowling alley on the property at Lyndhurst, and we knew we had two ferry landings to do, and I said, well, you know, call me crazy. One of the things I always say I love about Lori is that, you know, she'll come with her computer and she's going to show me a photograph, and it's always like, well, call me crazy, and it means that she's found something that has, you know, a piece of it, you know, or something that, you know, if you know how to add or subtract things to it. So I announced very early on that I thought this could be the ferry landing, and got some strange looks. And then I think again Hugh did this next illustration, um, which
Yeah.
everyone agreed would be wonderful. And then in one of those very, very hard to explain film business things, when we shut down for the pandemic, when we started gearing up again, the producers decided that they didn't want to do many sort of one day locations. They wanted to you know, be in Troy for 5 weeks, in Newport for 4 weeks, and on stage, and really not be jumping around too much because they felt the support structure. I mean, that was another thing during the pandemic. You know, we had to, you know, Lori had to figure out where we were putting all these tents and all this, you know, it was just, you know, it was beyond the normal support. So they decided that we wouldn't go and shoot at Lyndhurst. So in the next slide, we ended up building the platform, you know, the dock, and everything that's green was done by visual effects, and the white part we built practically, and then there was the theory that we would do the awnings so that they would blow in the wind without having to be animated, which Douglas, you said in the end it really didn't work out that way.
Yeah, you just wanted something more dramatic from them than what we were able to get on the day, but at least, you know, the texture of what they were supposed to be or the reference of where they needed to be, it was still, you know, valuable for us to have them there.
So it seems crazy that somehow or other the thing is shaped like the bowling alley at Lyndhurst, because that was our original plan, and we built very little of it, and and then I think this was amazingly successful for being
Yeah,
a bowling alley.
yeah, I think it's almost the reverse of what uh, was intended, right? We
Yeah.
built a pier, and yeah, water's always tricky, so I'm always like, but I think it came out well.
I like the ships that are at the end of the dock.
Yeah, we photographed a bunch down in Lower Manhattan, Seaport. There's one that's like docked there full time. But again, you know, we had this location that I was able to go and photograph and scan and do all the work I needed to do to bring it, bring it to.
So you ended up photographing the thing that originally we had thought would be the main set, and using it to basically texture map, you know, this green box we made.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was able to go up for one day, you know, without bringing the whole company. It's easier for me to go, or production didn't have an issue with me going up to get all the reference materials.
But as we all know, in film and television, sometimes it's hard to explain how things land where they land. And the idea that we built this little tiny bit and then these green octagons, and it became the set still kind of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember, Bob. Did we decide, like, did you come on to the Lyndhurst idea after we had scouted like Josaphat and some of the other places where we were looking at the stables, like at Sands Point?
No, no,
Or
because
did we, I can't remember how that
for
happened.
some reason this I said out of the starting gate, but we had two ferry landings because unfortunately this is in New
Right.
Jersey. She's arrived by train and then she's taking the ferry uh, to New York, and then we had the New York ferry landing because by the time she arrives in New York, a great storm has kicked up,
It's brewed.
and that was we needed two. It was hard enough
Right.
that we had a ferry landing. We needed two. I think. Yeah, I should have put that next, but I didn't. So
Well, you put Morenci, Arizona.
yeah, but we'll see the other ferry landing later. So then we got the script for season three, and the first scene they're in Morenci, Arizona, because they're trying to buy up land, across the country to have the first New York to Los Angeles uninterrupted train trip. Um, which is interesting because it actually had already been done before our story, but we made it a feature anyway. And Laura, you spent some time like looking at Wild West cities and different places.
Yeah, we found very sad versions of sort of amusement park versions of what those were in New Jersey. I think there's one in Rockland County that I had remembered and someone else had confirmed, and it was, broken down, and there were like there was like maybe one storefront worth left, but mostly it got so rudimentary that it was like, well, can we just find a big sandy area? I think at a certain point we were just looking for dirt.
So I think, part of the way this ended up in this order was that the ferry landing was sitting there on the back lot. We built it on the back lot behind our set, just beyond the horse turnaround area. And we decided that we would rip up the ferry landing and build as much as we could of the western town. And it was pretty early that I think I just sat down and did a plan, and it didn't change, from the rough I did one night at 8 o'clock. And so fortunately, the buildings are pretty rudimentary, as far as accuracy is concerned. But we had a whole thing with the right mix for the soil because it had to be red. And I think there was a version where it was too red, and then we had to sort of cut it back with some regular sand. Now, this was Douglas's field trip.
Yeah, we went out to New Mexico to film plates and elements for, right before they arrive in the town, there's a bit of a sequence of them traveling through the desert countryside. So uh, we went out there with a second unit to just film the horses and carriages running through the environment. And then we found this location when we were out there scouting, and we all thought that this would be a great spot for the town. It's kind of nestled within this little couple of mountainy outcroppings. So we took Bob's set, we scanned the whole thing, built the backs to the buildings, and we were able to track it and plunk it down into this drone shot that we shot out in New Mexico. We added a few more structures to the back of the town and into the distance just to have it kind of feather off into the landscape a little bit more. But, most of it was all from what the art department had built practically there at our back lot.
Here's the New York City ferry landing, even
Right,
after the other
right.
ferry.
Back
So
to
this
the
is
Okay,
one of
that's
those.
pits.
right.
This is one of those things where we were out scouting for various mansions and things, and uh, we came. Is this St. Josephat?
That's Josaphat, yeah.
A location that I've scouted. You know how there's some locations you've scouted probably a dozen times in your life and never filmed. And we went to St. Josephat, which has elements and it's never quite right. And as we were leaving, I said, "Wait a minute, maybe this could be the ferry landing." And what's great about it is that you're protected on three sides, so you would need less visual effects work. But one of the reasons that we've never filmed at St. Josaphat over the years is that it is very inaccessible, and you end up on some pretty windy, narrow dirt roads getting where you're going. So, and again, the ferry landing wasn't a sufficient portion of a day in order to film it here. So, but it was part of the idea, and so the instruction was going around looking for buildings that were three-sided. And or finding a U shape of buildings. And this is a little wider than we had envisioned, but again, we figured in New York the ferry landing would be substantially bigger than the one in New Jersey. So this, what college is this?
It was a former, well, it was called Dow Hall, and it was owned by Pace University, or had been Pace University. But prior to that, it was another college.
And didn't we find that Phil Canfield, our lead man, had attended college here?
Yes, he had. It was actually, yeah, I think it was Briarcliff. I think it was actually called Briarcliff College at one point before Pace took it over. And then it fell into private hands when we were, connecting with them.
So these were a couple of the renderings of trying to pitch how we were going to make this college into the ferry landing. And one of my catchphrases is "It looked better than it had a right to." Although I did have a little bit of a thing with the DP that I lost of saying in this with the central window, it's hard to resist lighting a window that large. And they're saying they didn't have anything that could make that much illumination, at night. But it would be the kind of thing that only a few of us would notice. So this is an actual film a clip from that's probably a screen grab where I edited out my credit, your name on dailies, when, and then you know how sometimes it's the only thing you could find. I think Douglas, was it tough doing the wording on the side of the building in the rain?
It wasn't too bad because it's more of like this transfer effect. So you're kind of already picking up some of the texture and the light that's happening within the frame. So it's more of just like an overlay. But
Because
we
the
did
little
have
ferry
to,
landing thing was not practical. Yeah.
right. But then also we had to darken down the roof. It was so brightly lit from outside
Mm.
and the sky. We had to darken down to give it that stormy feeling. We put some, you can barely see them there, but there's some masts, just some ship masts kind of sticking up in the sky there. But yeah, not too much from us here, but
We
uh,
acquired these lampposts from some other show so that we didn't have to steal them from the back lot, which would have been sad. Which that was almost our approach. Anyway,
and
this is another one of those, funny things. Our producer said he thought that this was a harebrained scheme when we proposed it, that we just had an arrival to the house of Mrs. Chamberlain, who was one of our characters in season one. And again, she would have lived in Manhattan, or we know that we know where we could have done it. Like we could have probably done it on 81st Street if we had had control, because there are enough places but we know we couldn't do horses in the city. We couldn't do dirt. We couldn't do cobblestones. And said I think maybe we could do something with the front of Rosecliff in Newport, and that's what we ended up doing.
then we used, is that the Morgan Library, the Duke House,
It's the Duke Mansion,
the Duke Mansion? Yeah.
which of
So
course is later than our period,
right.
but it's big.
Yeah. But yeah, in this situation, we were able to use other parts of Rosecliff to kind of build out that either side of the entrance. And then again, with locations help, picking some bigger buildings like the Duke Mansion and uh, being able to go photograph those in the city to put into the distance in these shots.
And we put in part of the sidewalk, so it's kind of Frankencliff. Um, but one of the things, sometimes the truth isn't true enough, so that the one strange thing about Rosecliff is the entrance is all the way to the right side of the building, and the vast majority of these mansions had a center entrance. So that was we were trying to get away from it feeling like the entrance was all to one side of the building. This is a little tiny thing that we try to stay in touch as much as we can once we've finished filming, and Douglas will stay in touch and send little clips or little screen grabs and whatnot. And I happened to want to go by, and we were having lunch, and he was showing me some things that they'd been working on, and we had done Ochre Court is a mansion in Newport that we were using as Sidmouth Castle, which was supposedly in England. And there was just this thing where Bertha departs on her carriage, and I saw this and I went, "Oh my gosh! I didn't realize that the ceiling of this porte cochere was going to be so prominent." And of course, I had my iPad with me, and scribbled some coffered ceiling in there, and then found a couple reference pictures. I think it's right then I gave you a couple reference pictures, and then they added this.
Yeah, you told me the school it was from. I forget what the school was, but it's on the Upper East Side there somewhere.
Mm.
Um, I think it might be in the porte cochere of the Burton Con mansion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
As you know, Kalina Inbal, you really have to rely a lot on your mental Rolodex, and hopefully remember buildings. And it's like, where is there a coffered ceiling? Oh, the porte cochere at Burton Con. And fortunately, I think my memory is one of my better skills in for work. you know. But it was great that just by chance, because if you go back to the other one again, Inbal, it really makes a big difference. Looking at the concrete ceiling versus
Yeah.
the Burden Con inspired coffering. But it was just a happenstance. It almost didn't happen. Season 3 finale. Um, I mentioned that there's always this problem. Like we get a script and the wording is almost always the same. This time Bertha has gone all out. Bertha has really outdone herself. And in season 1 there were two of those moments, and in season 2 there were two or three of those moments. And we had to up the ante. And so when we came to the finale of Bertha has really outdone herself again, um, I thought maybe we could introduce electric light, and I found the backup for the fact that some people were having parties where they were using electricity, and they had to have a generator installed on their property to run it. And so this was the back of the house. Again, it's probably a little inspired by the substantially later Luna Park, but we did a certain amount of this practically, and then Douglas did the rest. This was one of those funny things, though, where again with the iPad, I had photographed the back of the house and scribbled, and was showing to the producers what I thought we were going to do. And then I said, well, we'd have to light the windows across the back. And they said, well, I don't think we need to do that, would we? I mean, go into every room. And then I had done a little thing where I lightened the windows on a separate layer, and then you turn it on and turn it off. And as soon as I turned off the windows, they went like, oh yeah, right.
Hmm.
Um, it's funny with convincing people. One of the funny, we had also some stuff inside, and my favorite moments was uh, uh, Cynthia Nixon came in, and she was wearing her ball gown with her, pin curl still in her hair, and her Uggs, and she said, "Wow, this looks really nice. Whose idea was this?" And I said, "That's my job, Cynthia. Whose idea was this?" Anyway, so this was our season finale of season 3. I think that's
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's again back and forth finding the repeated elements that that Bob can build and then I can take and expand from. So all the bunting that's lit up, the different archways, and then the light bulbs that you see on the second and third facade headers. Like they built a string of them that I could photograph and see how the light actually fell on the stone, and use all that for reference to inform how we would have to do it on those upper levels that we didn't have access to.
we built a 10-foot wide section of stone wall with the cornice ledge with the practical lights on there,
Mhm.
which isn't something I would have thought to do, but So that was one of the things Douglas said, if you give me this, it'll make it much easier to get the right throw of the light, and
Yeah.
so there we are. Oh,
Mm. Ah,
our season
Ah,
two finale was the Metropolitan Opera House. And, it's funny, when I had interviewed for the job, I said, "Are you going to get into the opera wars?" And they said, "Oh, you know about the opera wars?" And I said, "Yeah." And I started, because I sort of got into this business because of being an opera fan, in a strange way. So the whole thing was about the old money versus the new money, and the Academy of Music on 14th Street didn't have enough boxes for the growing society. And since Bertha, who basically is Alva Vanderbilt, couldn't get a place at the Academy, they put together a syndicate to build their own opera house. So in season before we even started, Michael Engler, our director, was doing press for the rollout of the first Downton Abbey movie, which he had done. And he said, "Well, why don't you come down to Philadelphia and we'll look at the Academy of Music?" So this is the Academy of Music. And we were looking at it for a different purpose, for being the Academy of Music on 14th Street, which was the earlier building in season one. And then I said, "Well, now a warning. If you're going to get into the opera, Metropolitan Opera in its supposed season two, which we didn't know would exist," I said, "You can't use this for the Academy of Music because it is the only European style opera company in the country." So we had put a pin in it and decided we would do use this. And then, of course, one of the things that you forget is that it doesn't actually have boxes. So the whole plot is about the opera boxes, and we only have, two on each side of the proscenium, and no boxes in the rest of the horseshoe. So this was one of those things where it had to be made from several locations. And we were looking and looking for theater. I had dreaded, I knew when the Metropolitan Opera House was going to be written in that sooner or later I was going to turn the page and it was going to say the Metropolitan Opera House in the process of being built, which it did. So we had to find a location for that. And I had looked at this with Lori several times and, said, "I don't think it works. I don't think it works." And then, the element of trust you have when someone that you work with for a long time says, "I honestly don't think we're going to do better than this." And I know if she was saying that was the way it was. So we had to use the lobby areas of this movie theater in Albany for the tour of the Opera House under construction. And you can see that that character was very pleased by what she saw. And then they look out from the stage and they see the opera house in progress. So these pieces, octagonal wooden pieces that are on either side of the frame, uh, shrunk down the size of the proscenium at this movie theater because I think the opening at the proscenium at the Academy of Music is only like 53 or 54 feet, and this movie theater was like a 70-foot wide proscenium. So we
Mhm.
built a sort of squint version of the gold columns that flank the entrance to the proscenium of the Academy, and then covered them with this wooden stuff so that we would hide the fact that they didn't match. And then we built our corridor behind our opera boxes to match the decor of the movie theater, which I was never crazy about. We pinked it up a little bit, and then we built the opera boxes. And this is when we discussed a lot. We discussed building an opera box, and then we discussed building two opera boxes, and then we discussed doing three. And then maybe having finally learned some lessons from season one, we realized if we were going to do it right, that we really needed five. So these were built on stage in the last remaining square inch of space on our crowded stage. We don't have any swing space, which is kind of amazing for a show like ours. So we built the opera boxes, and as I always put it, that Douglas then had to slide the opera boxes between the first and second balcony as if it was like some kind of giant cassette. And so the green is the actual opera house, and this is obviously what we built.
We were able to go down to Philadelphia to scan the opera house there. So we had a digital asset to start with, which we then also scanned our boxes on our stage, and we were able to build the whole opera house as a full digital asset with the boxes and the balcony. And while we were in Philadelphia, we also shot lots of crowd plates to be able to put into some of these shots. But it was important to have those 5 boxes because in the story they're always talking or looking, glancing at who's sitting where. And so we would shift, if Bertha is supposed to be in the center box, we might put her in the box all the way to the right so that she can look around the curve to her left or vice versa. And, we would just kind of move people around that way to make it feel bigger.
Wonderful.
This
So
was the most challenging. That the shot of Bertha coming in was the most challenging because we start with her coming through the door and we wrap around with her to reveal the whole opera house. And we had to kind of match these 2 different camera moves on our stage and in Philadelphia with all the crowd plates and all that stuff to kind of pull it off.
it's funny on our second trip to Philadelphia, taking some more measurements and some more photos. The Scott who was drawing it had said, "Well, I figured out a way to make a little more room for the people in the boxes and whatnot." And it was like, no, no. I mean, it would have moved the columns out of alignment. And it's the one thing that's an absolute given is the columns have to have the identical spacing to the Academy of Music. Otherwise, we're in all sorts of trouble. And that was one that could have slipped by us. So Douglas, when you LiDAR scan, it automatically gives you the gray model, right?
It gives you a very dense thing that needs to be cleaned up, but yeah, it gives you the geometry or a reference of what the geometry needs to be. But then you're also taking thousands of photographs to get the textures and the colors to be able to map onto that geometry.
There we go.
That's it. Wow, very impressive. Really, really impressive. Thank you so much, Bob and Laurie and Douglas. I Are there any questions, Inbal?
Well, thank you very much as well. I echo Kalina's. We're super inspired by the presentation. Thank you. A lot of hearts are being shared on screen right now.
Like a birthday
So
card.
Yeah, exactly.
and to anybody here, we welcome you to send your questions. We have about 20 minutes or so to answer. So I'm going to read a few out to Bob and team. So, 2 really interesting questions. One, how have you ever felt stuck or uninspired? How do you overcome that designer's block? I'll start with that.
Um, I would say I've personally been stuck on other shows more than this one, because there's just such a wealth of interesting research and the only thing that you get a little stuck on, like, as I keep saying, is what the next party is, So and what else we could say with flowers. So there was a scene in season 2 where they were having dinner, and while they were having dinner, they were decorating the Great Hall, and then when they come out, it's all been decorated, and then the opera singer Christina Nilsson has been brought, to give a recital and encourage them all to pay for the new opera house. And it just said that there were a lot of flowers, and then I said, well, there's one character walks out of the dining room and says, "This isn't possible." And I thought, well, it certainly is possible that somebody put a bunch of flowers around while they were having dinner. So we decided we needed to build a little set for the opera and integrate it into the Great Hall. And so there was a little kind of painted set for Faust that the Scenics loved making, just because it keyed off of the one line where she says, "This isn't possible." And sometimes you have to find the tiniest thing as a launching point. But on this show, the only thing that stymies me is what the next party looks like.
I have another question here about uh, the budget, the VFX budget, construction, and of course, you don't have to share numbers. Hopefully, you don't actually remember them, but how does it work with the conversation about budget in general, or limitations, and so on?
Well, it's one of those things going into season two, we were automatically told that we had, less money than, they keep saying we have to cut back each season. I mean, it used to be that a show was a success and then they would loosen the purse strings and you had more money in the second season. And now it seems to be more of the thing of like, well, we have people watching the show, so we don't have to, spend as much money. But it's a real dangerous thing in the VFX area because people seem to think it's like it just happens. And a lot of things that weren't planned for are suddenly discussed on Scouts, and the director says, and here it would be great if we saw whatever.
Yeah.
And those things are often not in your beginning of the season budget. So what do you do, Douglas?
I always say it's like a length of string. You never know how it's gonna cost in the end, but and it's also a thing where I feel like they're gonna pay for it one way or the other. How much they build versus how much digitally it's built. I think it's gonna cost something somewhere. So I'm always advocating to build it for real, build as much as you can for real. It gives everybody more freedom on the day when you're trying to film it, and it gives us more to work from when we have to extend it in the end anyway. So it's always worth it to put it into the shot practically, whatever you can, as much as you can. But it is always a discussion, where does Bob end and where do I pick up from? It's constant.
But these things constantly expand and contract, and there's a scenario where, you have to put in your budget before the tech scout.
Yeah.
And then I have never been on a tech scout where the scope of things shrunk
Right.
ever. And particularly, people think that it's some kind of magic, you press a few buttons and the digital stuff appears. And I think uh, that seems to grow on scouts, and that seems to grow, as the director finds their vision, less so. I mean, they're by a certain point, they're pretty aware of what we're going to build and what we can and can't build or what our time frame is. But people seem to think that things can expand from the VFX world, as they cook things up. So that's the trickiest thing to navigate, I think.
Yeah. And I think in post we get a little more flexibility where, you really decide where do you want to spend that money in the end. Do if we do run into a problem where we're up against the budget, which we are often, we'll have to have serious conversations on where can we pull back in order to make this work. Where do you want to spend the money most? Where is it most effective? And where can we either cut some shots out to help put the resources in a different place or something like that.
I have another question here about working with physical models, which you mentioned before, Bob. You mentioned that it helps communicate with the DP and the director. Does it help you see more clearly where changes need to be made, or, in
Yeah.
your conversation in general with Laura and Doug?
Models and any visualization we do, whether it's a physical model or whether a previs or whatever, or a concept sketch, um, can serve two purposes. I mean, for me, I'm only interested in how much it informs of the design. I remember I started in theater, and there was always a thing of people figured that it wasn't going to be perfect on the stage, so the model was going to be some monument to, that of what they wanted. But unless someone's asking for a presentation, do it to learn what I need to learn, and once you've learned that this is the right proportion or that this is the solution, I don't often find the need to like keep going or to take something to a further step, because to me it's more of a learning tool than it is a presentational tool. And you know, season one we were asked to show things to give them the idea of what the show was like, but people, I mean, the studio was not, or network was not looking for information on what the opera house was going to be like. So that wasn't as fully worked on. It was we decided what we needed to know, and once we knew, we didn't sort of do renderings. But it's a whole different thing. It's either informational or presentational, you know.
Great. I
But
have another question, a couple of questions here that are more locations based, so it'd be interesting to hear from you and Lori. Some is about the dirt, using dirt on the street, like what kind of dirt it is, how do you even put that onto the street, and so on, your experience with dirt. And the related question is, could you have prevented needing massive restoration after weathering of the exterior buildings on your backlot, now in retrospect?
you want to go, Lori, or
Well, I was going to let you start with the dirt because
the dirt? You know, it's
as a
interesting.
location manager, honestly, the number of discussions I overheard about the texture, the quality, the color, and the weight of the dirt was, beyond anything I would have ever thought we needed to think about. So I think there's something interesting there because obviously I love to listen to all you guys talk so that when I go into a city or town and I can actually explain in detail exactly what we're doing. So
It's funny because
I'll
we're
let you
starting a
start.
or and Larry Brown, our art director, had a box, a banker's box, and he said, "Can this live in your office?" And I said, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's literally
Dirt.
a box of dirt." It was a box with Ziploc bags full of different colors of dirt and different amounts of gravel. We had a whole thing at the beginning of the show of whether we were going to have a cobblestone street or not. And we couldn't afford real cobblestones, and there was a whole thing of making them out of concrete, and it was going to have cost like something in the like $1 million range to just to cobblestone the streets. And then we knew that the horse wranglers were going to say that it wasn't good for the horses, and so we were saying that since the Russell Mansion was just built, that the street was not fully built out yet, that there are vacant lots that are a little hard to notice if you look down the street. And that's how we justify that there was dirt. Um, it's rare for us to use dirt on locations. Mostly we use these cobblestone mats that are some kind of vinyl thing that the paint peels off and you have to paint them every third or fourth use. It's fun. And um and then we kind of sprinkle a little dirt, like kind of like powdered sugar on top to hide the seams and whatnot. And that hides them to a certain extent. And then Douglas still has to do some sort of seam repair. So we don't have a great consistency in terms of what streets are dirt and what streets are cobblestone. But it's very rare for us to be able to use dirt in a practical location. I mean
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
why.
interesting. I was going to say, interestingly, season one, we did go into Troy and you guys saw what Monument Square looked like. So it was a where three different arteries converge into town, four actually. And so, as a location manager, you want to ask for too much and hope to negotiate down to something that's going to be reasonable for us. What was kind of amazing about Troy is standing there with everybody from their DEP people to the mayor to the police to the fire department and having this big meeting with 10 city agencies and standing in Monument Square. And there's that location manager moment where I can only, it's akin to other things I've done where it's like, can we land a helicopter on the FDR? It was like, this was more like, this was more like, hey, look in this direction. We want to put dirt as far as we can see. Look in this direction. We want to go to and it was a sensible ask in some ways. It's like, we want to put dirt up until where that bar is that, everybody goes to or this and that. And remarkably, agency after agency just had very pointed questions about how we were going to manage the dirt, most of which I think we
Drainage.
did we did pretty effectively. A lot of it was what are those things called? The buddies. We had sandbags that protected the drainage, for instance. We had taken up parking meters. We had taken everything out of the way before we put the dirt down. I'd say we anticipated everything really well, except for weather. So at one point it was hot, it was summer, and we went from like monsoon Troy to
Dust Bowl.
I called it Operation Desert Troy. So at one point, I think during monsoon Troy, Phil Canfield, admirably, it looked like, City Field. There were just tarps and cinder blocks and 20-mile-an-hour winds and monsoon rains and set dressers rolling out tarps and throwing down cinder blocks to hold it down. And then a few days later, all of that was picked up, got really dry and dusty. And it was like the Wild West out there. So that was the one thing, if we were to do it again, I think we understand better how to manage that. But otherwise, it went so well that when we go back every season, the first question people always ask me is, are you going to put dirt down and close the streets again? And they say this kind of in an anticipatory way. We had a lot of tourists. It became a tourist attraction. We had people from other towns. Once the dressing went up and all of the signage went up and the awnings went up, a lot of these stores kept things. I mean, if you go to Troy, the planters in front of many of the stores are still ours. There's awnings on a hotel still in Monument Square. And I think for a lot of people there, Troy, especially older people, Troy was a very busy, happening place at one time. And for it to become that again, there was a lot of nostalgia and a lot of love for what was going on. So it's been interesting to see the city. I have to say I've never worked in a city that's so enthusiastic about closing streets.
It
Do
was
they,
a little bit of it's a bonus when you're doing a period show because when people see things brought back to period and they see the signage and they see the horses and all that kind of stuff, um, they complain less and act like they've acquired a temporary theme park. And I always say, even for contemporary shows, people should always bring like a half a dozen period cars, just park them on the street somewhere, and people will not be complaining as much because they'll be busy having their pictures taken in front of the cars. So I think the fact that we're period actually gave us a little they enjoyed it more. One of the things that was funny was when it really started raining and it got all muddy. Little historical factoid was that when the streets were still dirt, they did do cobblestones just for the crosswalks. So we had some extra of our cobblestone blankets, and we like threw down some plywood and threw the cobblestone mats on top of them to make the crosswalks. So we could act. It was just practical not to have to walk through the mud to get across the street. And that was just a little bit of history suddenly kicked in when we saw this mud pile.
And what about the other half of the question about whether, could you have prevented the restoration or what to do in that situation?
Um, there are a few things. I mean, there were certain things that in the coining on the Russell Mansion, for example, was done with foam, and I would have probably wanted it to be a wooden understructure. If I had the benefit of hindsight. Um, Certain things that like balustrades and whatnot were not necessarily done with a heavy rim spray or something that would be done more to like theme park grade. But again, these were things that would have jacked the price up, and I don't know whether it would have been provided for. But there are definitely things we could have done. But I think ultimately, being in the entire winter is people think they're going to cover it with plastic, and it's like, oh well, then it got humid, and then it was actually worse when it was covered with plastic because everything got wet and then it expanded and contracted, and sometimes you try your best, but it's still a fake building out in 30-degree weather.
It's also on a hill. There's a lot of wind. There's a little bit of a wind tunnel that's been created by the geography there.
I have a question from myself, seeing as you guys have just started your first steps in your new season. If from what I understand, you said you're location scouting, right? And I know you can't tell us what exactly you're doing, but as you're looking towards the new season, do you have any insight you want to implement? Any thoughts on how work can be done? Either better or more creatively, or things you would like to, move from, I don't know, from the last season, anything that you're excited to start implementing in the new season?
Well, certainly in working with VFX and working with Douglas, our British castle that we did in season three, Sidmouth Castle, was based on a building called Ochre Court in Newport. It was supposed to be English, so the first thing we had to do was lop off the mansard roof, which wouldn't have been, in a 16th century, English home, and that building ended up needing a lot more work, constant going back and forth with it. And Douglas ended up probably creating more of it than not. And I said, in hindsight, I would say, since he ended up going and scanning this Longleat castle in England, it would have been better off to scan the castle, mostly use the castle as it was, and then have us build maybe a 30-foot wide front that matched the opening to Longleat Castle and having to create less. So that's in my mind as we find other problems coming up. So the twice that I've run to Douglas's office in the last week were when I got tips about things that were coming up, and saying in one instance that I think this probably still exists somewhere, and time to start our researcher, in finding what the model might be that still exists somewhere, because we obviously, when Douglas, when you went to Longleat, you said you were just amazed by the scale, like the Breakers was like a fraction of the size of one of these English manor houses.
Yeah, I mean, we filmed at the Breakers for season one, and you walk into that place and you're just kind of blown away by the scale of it if you've never seen anything like that. And then I'm over in England scanning the rooftop of this Longleat house and the grounds, and it's just a whole different thing. It's just like a whole different level over there. And we just don't have anything like that here. And so we really needed to go get that element, to properly showcase this, Gladys storyline. But, as far as trying to head that something like that off at the pass, it's just I feel lucky to come on to a show like this as early as I do get to come on, because it's those collaborations between Lauri, Bob, and I that like really help producing that those kind of big set pieces. It just makes it all go much more smoothly.
One of the great things
I
about what we do is that the learning curve never ends. And, no matter how long you've been doing it, you come out of almost every project with a list of things that you would do different, or some things you've learned. And we learned in season three that it's more cost effective to send Douglas to Europe than it is to try and Frankenstein pieces that we find here.
Yeah,
And
I was going
would
to.
never thought that was the answer. It's cheaper to send Douglas to France.
And
yeah.
Lori, and Lori.
And me, I would like to go next time, Douglas.
Yes, please.
I was like, take me to Arizona. Um, no, I was going to say, Bob, I think what's interesting at the beginning of every season, and it's a discussion we always have, is the script is the Bible, right? And we're presented with certain activities or descriptions of spaces that once we get into the real historical research of it and start looking at photos of it, doesn't always really match up with what we see on the page. And I think it's something that we're beginning to grapple with this season where is your director going to want to be more honest to the images that are historical images, or is your director going to want to go for the producer's wow moments? What does that really mean for the truthiness of the historical, recreation of these spaces? And I think it's a discussion that we start very early on. And I think it's something you and I are talking about a lot right now.
I mean, I've been reading books on the period for like 6 years now, and I recently reread or re-listened to the book Gotham, and so now, even though it's not necessarily our department, because of our research, we'll go to the producers and go to the writers and saying, we have learned that this is not really accurate and it would be more like this, and they have the choice of either deciding to go with the history or go with whatever their more impressionistic version is. I mean, for example, I was saying that we're in Newport 10 years earlier than we should be in Newport. I mean, we're in Newport in the mid 1880s, and most of those places weren't even built until the 1890s. And I think it's funny. I think that Julian Fellows is a little bit more aware of and knowledgeable about and respectful of the English history than some of our history. And it's like, oh, who's going to know 10 years or so? And I mean, I start out being kind of a stickler, and then sometimes I think people expect me to remember more than I remember, but unfortunately, I retain a lot. But But
So to wrap up our session, and I know we have many questions, so thank you for others who have submitted questions, but I'll end with the question I'm sure Bob gets a lot, but this would be a really interesting perspective on it with Doug and Lauri. What would be your advice for an emerging designer? And I think that's a good one to have as a last question. And I wonder maybe Lauri and Douglas could start from your perspective, in fact, because that's very insightful for us.
That's so interesting. I think the first foremost thing is to be decisive, is to have done your research, have some sort of vision, and clarity and the ability to so much of what we do is based on communication. And whether that's communication is verbal or through images, nothing helps us more than even one key image that we can give to our location scouts. And for that, that's gold for us. Sometimes it really just takes one picture. And I would say have clarity about whatever the project is that you're doing and maybe come up with a conceptual, not a board, but, a mood board, if there are key locations, just to have at least one image or colors or anything you can give us that's concrete and the simplest, most granular level. It helps us help you by we have to communicate to a bunch of scouts that are out there. Oftentimes I love to scout myself, but oftentimes I'm hiring other people, and the easier that it is for us to communicate to them, the better our relationship is. It's that much easier to work together.
I mean, that's great. I would add only being open to that collaboration is super helpful. Bob's mentioned it a few times now where we will go back and forth with scribbles on images trying to figure out what something needs to be. And we are always, on my side, I am always, walking that line of like what's historically accurate and what's, servicing a TV show entertainment wise. And, being able to go back and forth and having someone who's collaborative in that role to, give ideas or help out where we may be stuck in a certain aspect of a detail or a design of something that needs to go into a background is just immensely helpful. I don't think I'd be able to do my job nearly as well if we didn't have that partnership.
I would say on every project, you're always looking for its Rosetta Stone. That kind of, you always find one piece of research or a couple pieces of research that kind of make it start to come together. And it's hard because there's no denying. Someone asked a question about it earlier. Some shows you see, like as soon as you read it, you kind of see it, and other shows you have to search a little more to find it. And the more it's the same thing with scenic artists. If you can, it's one thing to describe something, it's another thing to say make make it look like this, or this is the texture, or this is and it's so much about research. And we have researchers now, but like I say that it's like you always kind of feel like you want to start doing your own research. You want to drive the car, you don't you don't want to be in the back seat when the research is starting.
Be
Beautiful.
specific.
Yeah.
Specific. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes on any given show, it's like, you know, it doesn't have to be the perfect decision. Right now, we just need a decision. Or I'll say, it has a quality. It's not necessarily the right quality, but at least it has a quality.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to everyone. Kalina, I'm handing it over to you to say the last words and adjourn our session.
Thank you very much for this wonderful session. I love the show. I love everything about it. I learned so much from you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to everyone who's
Thank
joined
you.
us and
And
to
all
our
the work that
wonderful
you guys
panel.
do to make this organization happen. I mean, it's a huge task, and I know that you you have very busy day jobs. So the fact that you find the time and make this happen is really amazing and very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody, and we hope to see you soon. Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.